the green room, you are the only one, and your presenters are the only one who can see.
Oh, okay. Good evening, everyone.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So I believe we can already start. The time is far gone, and let's just dive straight away into it. So please, my name is Isaac Quinn, and I'll be taking us through DCIT 102 tonight. Please, in case at any point in time you can't hear me, you can kindly draw my attention to that. And in case you have any question as well, you can lift your hands or kindly prompt me about that. Yeah. So for the sake of we moving together, I'll start from the very scratch, and we are going to take it as though we are starting everything all over again. But then one thing about 102 is that I think it's a lot. It's a lot. So I would have to kind of run through very fast. Okay. Regardless, we'll try our best to make sure that we pull everyone along as we try to go through very fast. So basically, we are going to look at some basic concepts. We are going to look at computers as a whole. Okay, look at computers and everything there is to know about it, and then we look at the characteristics of computer system. That is the basic characteristics. We look at the historical development of computers, and then we look at the generation of computers and then the types of computers. So this particular session is the basis on which all other sessions are built. Let me not say that exclusively, but this particular session is kind of presents the basic idea through which all other sessions are built. So there are some things that you are going to come across here that you are not really going to that you are not going to go that much into details into, because when we go to session 2 and the other sessions, it explains them into depth. Okay, so spending a lot of time talking much about those things would kind of cut deep into our time. Whilst when we redo sessions, we'll be talking about the same thing again into details. So please, there are people who I believe have read ahead and might want to ask questions ahead of the section. I'll plead that we tailor all our questions to this particular section so that everything can move on very, very fast. So these are the things that we are going to look at. So let us begin. So basically, when you talk about computers, we all know what computers are, or we've all in one way or the other used computers before. It be our mobile phones, our laptop, our desktop, one way or even your calculators, one way or the other, you might have used the computing system before. Okay, so basically, when we are talking about computers, we are talking about some basic stuff. Okay, that is an electronic device that has the ability to accept input. Okay, that has the ability to accept input, and then it should have a processing power or a logic that tells the device what it should do with the input. Okay, and we call that our processing. It should be able to process the input, and then it should be able to return an output, and it should also have a storage medium that stores the processed input, or that stores our output for future use. So basically, we say a computer can be defined as an electronic device that follows commands to accept input, processes it, and then produce an output which can be stored and used later. So this is basically what a computer system is. Okay, so when an information is received and processed, what a computer does is that it stores this information for future use, and this information that is stored are stored in various mediums. Okay, they can be stored, or data could be represented in the form of numbers, that is numeric. It can be text or textual, audio, videos, or images. All these are mediums through which data is can be represented and also stored. Okay, so from there, let's look at the characteristics of computers. Please, there are certain sections that we are going to, or certain part of the presentation that we are going to stress more on them, because we would have to go in depth into them and then look at some stuffs there. So let's look at the characteristics of computers. So we are saying that a computer is a powerful device, okay, and it can be designed to do any kind of activity, provided all data and instructions are made available to it in digital form. And the basic characteristics of a modern computer include, we have speed. Okay, so basically we are saying here that one of the basic characteristics of a modern computer is its speed. That is one thing that differentiates a computer from other devices. Human beings also do have the ability to receive information, process it, and return an output. But the question is, do we have that ability to work with that speed that computers do? And the answer is obviously a no. For example, when we take a calculator and then we give it a set of inputs, let's just call out a random numbers. Let's say 2, 5, 10. Let's just mention a huge range of numbers. Just feed it to that particular computing system and then just press the equal to or ask it to return an output. And it will be able to process that huge chunk of data within a very, very short period of time and then return a valid output, okay? So that is one characteristic of computers. It is able to process data with speed, okay? And the speed with which computers process data is measured in hertz. When we are talking about hertz, what we are basically talking about is the number of cycles that a computer can process in a second. So if a computer can process, let's say, 500 cycles of data in a second, or 500 cycles of instruction in a second, we say its capacity or its speed is 500 hertz. Okay, if it is 5,000 per second, we call it 5,000 hertz, and the others. So one of the basic characteristics of a computer is that a computer is able to process information with speed that is very, very, very fast. So basically, if you are using a device that is a computer, but it's not able to process data with the speed that you are looking for, you start to find it problematic, because one of the reasons why everybody would go for a computer is to be able to work with, have data processed with speed. Assuming you buy a calculator or you go to the bookshop, you get a calculator, and then you punch a range of values into the calculator and you expect it to perform a calculation. You press the equal to sign and then you are there after 5 minutes, and then it's not able to return any valid outputs. You start questioning the functionality or the efficiency of that particular calculator that you've performed, because we generally expect that computers should be able to operate with speed. And number two, or the second characteristic of a computer that we're going to talk about here, is accuracy. So computers can ensure consistently very high degree of accuracy in computations, okay? We are saying that computers should not be prone to errors, or computers should not make errors, or computers do not make errors. And that is one of their characteristics. When you feed a given set of instructions to a computer, the computer would handle the instructions that you've given to it in that same manner within which it was given. So let's take a practical example where we assign a logic to a computer, okay? And the logic that we are assigning to a computer is that it's supposed to receive a batch of inputs. So let's call these inputs, let's say numbers, okay? So numeric inputs. And then after receiving these inputs, it's what it does next is that it processes this input and then generates an output. So let's illustrate. Let me see if I can have that illustrated on on the screen. Sorry, I'm coming. All right. So let's say we have a basic computing system, okay, which operates with a logic, let's say 2x plus y. So basically it receives two inputs. Let's call our inputs x and y. And then when you feed it with any two numbers, it multiplies the first number and adds the result to the second number. This is what this basically means. Okay. So if let's say our first number is 5 and our second number is 3, automatically we know our output is going to be what? 13. Or 13 is going to be the output that the computer is going to return. With this set of logic that is provided to the computer, there is no instance where you would assign 5 as the first number and 3 as the second number that the computer should return, let's say, a 10 as an output or any other result as an output, because we're expecting that basically computers should be accurate. Given a valid set of inputs, please, if the inputs or the instructions that is fed to the computer system is wrong, automatically we expect that the computer will also return a wrong output, because computers basically have no brains of their own. They just receive the instructions that we've assigned to them, process it, and then produce an output out of it. So if the logic that has been assigned to the computer at the first place is erroneous, that automatically means that the output in itself would also be erroneous. Aside that, if the logic is correct at all costs, we should also produce a correct output. So what we are saying here is that if you have a computer that is returning a bad output, okay, or it is not returning the intended output, what you should basically question is the logic with which the computer is operating, not the computer system on its own. Because a computer does not have a brain on its own. It is a logic that you've assigned to it that determines how accurate it can be. Okay. So once you assign accurate logic and accurate inputs, we are always expecting that computers should be able or should always produce a valid or an accurate output. And the third characteristic of a computer is its storage unit. So it should come with a huge storage unit. So computers do have large storage capabilities, which is measured in bytes. So we are saying that basically computers should also have a huge storage unit that helps us to store data, whether numeric text, audio, or images. And another characteristic of a computer here is also versatility, okay? That is, computers can perform almost any task that has a series of finite logic steps. Please, this is very, very important here, and I would want us to explain this before we move on, okay? This particular statement here, that is, computers can perform any task that has a series of what? Finite logical steps, okay? Look, if you enter a given logic to a computer system, or you give a logic to a computer system with which it should process inputs and generate outputs, and the logic that has been given or that is provided to the computer system as its processing power, okay, or its processing logic is infinite. What this basically means is that you have a case where the computer will be stuck in a process, because it will continue to run the processes over and over and over and over again, and will not be able to return an output. Okay, so when we are saying that a finite logical steps, we are saying that when you are issuing a logic to a computer, or let's say an algorithm to a computer, it should be within a specific range. It should define where everything starts and where everything ends, so that the computer knows very well where it should start executing the program and where it should end or stop executing the program. So at the end point of the execution, it knows that whatever it receives there becomes our output, or whatever it receives as at that point becomes our final output. And that is what is going to return on whichever output medium that you are using. Okay, so versatility basically means that computers can be used for different purposes. Okay, it can be for communication, it can be for research, for weather forecasting, for healthcare, for online trading, for education, for training, and so on. Computers can serve different purposes. Okay, so for instance, when you go to the healthcare sectors, computers are used there. In our basic day-to-day activities, we do use computers. In our schools or in education, computers are also used. And in all aspects of lives, computers are used. And please, let's take note of this. When we are talking about computers, we are not only talking about our laptops, our desktop, and our mobile phones. Those are not the only things that we are talking about. We are talking about every electronic device. One, it should be an electronic device. Okay, so we have a lot of electronic devices around us, but not all of them are computers. Example of some electronic devices we have around us are we have our iron, we have our fans, we have our bulbs, we have our fridges. All these are electronic devices. But the fact that they use electricity in their operations does not necessarily make them computers at the first place. In order for us to classify a device as a computer, it should have the ability, or it should have the capability to perform other processes apart from it being an electronic device. And the other processes that it has to be able to carry out are the tasks that we mentioned earlier. That is receiving data and then being able or being capable of processing that data and then returning an output or returning a valid output, and it also having a storage medium. Okay, so once all these conditions are met, we can be able to call any device and a computer. Okay, but then when we go forward, we are going to look at something which I believe is very, very important. This definition of computer that we just gave right now is the definition for a modern computer. Who along the line get to understand that computers kind of came from a long way back, okay? And previously, it wasn't in the form or the manner that we see today or that we use today. And so when we are talking about computers from ancient times, the definition would change, okay? But when we are talking about the definition for modern computers also, the definition kind of also changes a little. And along the line, we are going to look at how ancient computers do differ from modern computers. We said it just now that a computer must at all costs be an electronic device. But when you're looking at the history of computers, you'll get to understand that, look, there was a point in time where human beings were even called computers, where there were people whose job were to function as computers. Okay, but now you cannot call a human being a computer because a human being is not an electronic device. Okay, so another characteristic of a computer here is that it should be programmable. We should be able to program a computer. We should be able to issue a set of instructions. You should be able to issue a set of codes to the computer that causes it to perform a certain function on its own. Okay, and then this differentiates it from any other calculation device. Look, there are several other devices that can perform calculations, but not all of them are computers. For example, now in the modern world, we cannot call an abacus or we cannot call a mechanical or other mechanical calculators as computers. Even though they can perform calculations, we cannot call them computers. Okay, previously, or let's say in ancient times, they were all called let's say computable devices, okay, or devices that were used to perform computations. But in this modern scope, we cannot classify them as computers. Why? Because even though they can perform calculations, look, they cannot accept programs. You cannot code them. You cannot add an inbuilt set of instructions that determines how it should operate, like the scientific calculators that we use right now. Look, it is already pre-coded. You can even have modes, a whole lot of things. You can change the modes. It can do a whole lot of advanced tasks. That is the calculators that we have. And those abilities or those things it's able to do is as a result of a pre-written program that has been embedded within that system of that calculator that we use. And that is what enables it to be able to perform all its functions or all the functions that we see it perform. And those things were not present in ancient calculators. Okay, so here we are saying that one key characteristic of a computer is that it should be programmable. And the last one, we are saying that it should have the characteristics of tirelessness. Okay, a computer should not develop fatigue. When we are talking about getting tired, that is it's being stressed out after a whole level of activity, or it's developing fatigue or something. No, computers should not develop fatigue. They should not be tired after performing a whole set of let's say instructions or something. Yes, they can heat up, and you might have to turn them off or something of that sort for a while, or maybe they can develop fault or something of that sort. But please, they should not get tired or they should not develop fatigue along the line. So these are the basic characteristics of computers. So let's go back again and list them one by one. Sorry. So let's go back again and list them one by one. So we are saying that for a device to be called a computer, it must possess the following characteristics. And the characteristics that we mentioned are, sorry. Yeah. So the characteristics of a computer that we mentioned are: one, it should be fast, or it should be able to work with speed. It should be accurate. It should have a relatively high storage. It should be versatile. It should be programmable, and it should not develop fatigue in its course of processing information and returning output or performing its task. Okay. So please, as at this point, I would want to ask some very simple questions in order to ascertain our understanding so that we continue. Okay. Please, my first question or the first question, let's say our household appliances, we have electric irons, right? Electric irons come with thermostats, okay, devices that are able to detect when the iron has heated enough. And when it detects that the iron has heated to a certain extent, it automatically cuts the flow of power, okay? And please, domestic, the irons that we do use in our homes, we can recognize our functionality. Not only irons, but our fridges and other devices as well. So the irons, when you plug them for a while and they get heated to a certain extent, you tune them, and then it gets heated to a certain extent, it just offs on its own. So can we say that the iron is able to kind of perform certain functions on its own without you necessarily having to manually off and on it? Okay, if it cools to a certain extent, it ons back on its own or it turns on again. So can we say that because of these functions, we can call an electric iron a computer? So please, if you would want to answer, you can raise your hand. So you indicate whether yes or no, and you explain your answer. Can we call electric ion computers based on the principle that when they get heated, they're able to turn off on their own, and when it gets cooled up to a certain extent, they are able to turn on their own without you having to manually perform those functions? So based on this criteria, can we call an electric ion a computer? Please, can you get someone to answer this? Okay. Mr. Freeman, please, we are listening to you.
Good evening, sir.
Evening, sir.
For me, I would say no.
Okay. Please, your reason.
My reason being that computer should be able, the emphasis on the fact that it should be able to perform all the aforementioned activities before we can classify it as being a computer. All right. So an iron needs to be manually used before it can perform tasks. Okay, you have to manually use. It's not like as if we can give it a set of pre-written codes for it to perform a task. All right. And then secondly, also it lacks a storage and a memory. All right, to be able to collect data, even receive data on its own, collect, store, and perform certain functions with it when it's being called upon later. So for me, it's a no.
Okay. Thank you very much. So that is Mr. Freeman's contribution. So please, is there anyone else who have any other opinion? Okay, Mr. Prince. We are listening to you.
Yeah, sorry. Good evening. So, please, I didn't get your question. No. So I wanted to know if you could take it again. Sorry.
All right. So my question. So I was asking that based on everything you've discussed so far, can we say that an electric ion is a computer based on the principle that it is able to detect heat on its own and then automatically kind of turn off when it reaches a certain range of heat and turns on when its hotness level drops below a certain threshold also. So please, based on this criteria, can we call an electric ion a computer, please? That was the question.
Oh, okay. Then I would say yes, because it just might. You see, since we can consider a thermometer, a liquid in glass thermometer as what do you call it? An analog computer due to its functions and how it is able to function fine. Like, despite the fact that it doesn't take complex instructions and all, it just takes heat, increases memory, reduces mercury and all that. Then I don't think it's perfect to call the electric ion that operates like this kind of a computer. So then, in my opinion, yes, sir.
Okay, that's a very interesting submission also. Please, is there anyone else who also has any other submission or any other contribution to the discussion, please? Anyone else who would want to contribute? Oh, please, let's feel free to contribute. Okay. So please, anyone else? Okay. So let's basically look at this.
Please, there's a hand up there.
All right. Mr. Desmond. Please, we are listening to you, please. Okay, your mic is disabled. All right, please, you can talk now.
Okay, good evening.
Evening, sir.
Yeah, so I would say no, because from your submission, a computer has to be versatile, and I don't think the ion is versatile. It can perform many tasks. Okay, and another way to, it's not programmable, because there's no way you can give it a set of instructions to perform that can be done. So I think it's no.
Okay. Thank you very much, sir. All right, so I think for the sake of time, we would have to move on. So Every submission so far is correct in its own way. Okay. And I was saying something earlier that computers have evolved over time. And the definition for a computer that we use currently is that of a modern computer. Okay. So generally, when we say a computer, it can mean a whole lot of things. So when we go to the history of computers, you would get to find out that look, some of the things that we don't even or we will not even tag as a computer on a normal day. Okay, in certain scenarios or instances can be computers. Okay, but for the purpose of this particular of DCIT 102, we would want to limit the definition of computers to that of a modern computer. And when it comes to that of a modern computer, we would say that an ion cannot be exclusively classified as a computer, even though it is an electronic device. And certain capabilities that computers also do have. So it's just like a human being. When we are talking about the characteristics of living things, we list some stuff, right? That is the ability to respire, to feed. We list a whole lot of things, to excrete and all those things. And if even one or two of those characteristics are absent from those list of characteristics, we cannot tag a body as a living thing. Okay, so when you read the history of computers, you would clarify this better. But in a way, they are computers when you are referring to the as in the broader scale. Okay, you can classify them as computers. But when you are talking about modern, or when you are limiting the entire discussion to a modern computer, then we might say that it doesn't really fit all the specifications that we are looking for. Okay, so please thank you all for your contributions. We can move on. So limitations of computers. Okay, so even though computers are versatile, even though they have a lot of functionalities, even though they can perform a lot of tasks, they are fast, they are accurate and all those stuffs, they also do have limitations. And what are some of these limitations? One, computers cannot think on their own, hence relies on instructions to do anything, okay? And this particular point is kind of tricky, okay? And we'll talk about that. So computers cannot think on their own. Someone can be like, what about AI? Now we have artificial intelligence. And look, we now have there's something we call embedded systems, okay? These devices are pre-programmed with kind of artificial intelligence, and they are embedded into systems like this self-driving vehicles. This you've heard of a lot of them, like the Tesla self-driving vehicles. You put this vehicle on a road without a driver, and this vehicle will be able to find its way out based on the map. You just give it wherever it should go, and it's on its own. It's able to maneuver traffic. It knows where it should stop, where it should move. I heard that. I was even reading it last time, and I heard that there was this Tesla was planning to enroll this self-driving taxis. Okay, in the United States. And I was like, this is a very, very powerful technology. So we are getting into an age where computers can be able to do a lot of things on their own, and they will not be so much dependent on human beings. But can we conclude that based on this, computers can think on their own and can rely solely on its own without human instructions? This is actually something that I would want us to discuss, okay, when we are done with this topic. So I wouldn't want to conclude on it yet. I want to open or give everyone the opportunity to outwardly or openly express his or her ideas, okay. So point two, we are saying that computers do not have conscience, hence unable to differentiate between right and wrong. And we've seen this happen a lot of times. If you do follow the news, when it comes to AI in specific, please AI is not a computer, okay? AI is just an algorithm, a set of programs, a set of codes, okay, that is able to read data, and then it's machine learning, it learns, okay, improves on itself. It's not a computer on its own. It's just a set of programs or instructions, but they can be embedded into a computer system, okay? So computers in itself do not have conscience, okay? They are unable to differentiate between right and wrong. And I was about to give an instance or an example before diverting, and I was talking about a case where I was reading the news where someone committed suicide, okay? And after they investigated the reason for the person committing suicide, they realized that an AI chatbot contributed immensely to that particular act that the person committed, even to an extent that it even taught the person how he can kill himself, as in how he can do that without feeling much pain. As in, it was teaching a person much more innovative ways of killing himself. Okay, and he also did that. I also read the news where there was this mass shooters, okay, in the United States, who also was being bullied, and he resorted to an AI for advice on what he should do to his bullies, and the AI was able to convince him to carry out such an act. And all these things are things that happen on daily basis. Though we are saying that AIs are not computers on their own, we are saying that they can be embedded into computing systems, okay? So it means that logically and technically, they do not really understand the difference between right and wrong. Look, they are no living things. They do not have emotions. They do not have anything like that. They just are a set of programs, a set of codes, nothing more, nothing less. So computers are just a set of devices that receives instructions, and based on the instructions that we give to them, they process it and return an output. They do not really know whether what you've given to them is right morally. They have no moral bias. They don't really know whether this is ethical or not, whether this is moral or not. The only thing they know is that you've given it an input. They will process the inputs and then they'll return an output. Again, we have an open debate here about AI, okay, and it's been an exception to this. And I really want us to have a discussion about this. Okay, so point 3 is they cannot learn from experience, hence can commit the same error repeatedly. So what you are saying is that, look, if you give a wrong instruction to a computer, forget it. The computer will keep on repeating that same wrong output for that particular wrong instruction over and over again, and it doesn't even care. For example, if you're a graphic designer here and then you are designing a banner or a flyer for someone, and let's say the name of the company is let's call it what name should we use? Let's call the name of the company University of Ghana Limited. Okay. And then whilst typing University of Ghana Limited, you made a mistake. And when spelling the Ghana, you change the J to, let's say, Y, okay, or the G to any other alphabet. Look, if you are printing 1,000 copies of that banner, the computer does not know that there is a mistake here. It will print that same error for all the 1,000 banners that you are printing. And by the time you realize that error has run through all the output that was returned, the problem was not from the computer. The problem was from your input. That was the graphics that you fed it. And you told it to print a certain number of copies, and it just printed those same number of copies for you. So we are just basically saying that, look, if you give a computer an erroneous input or an error in its logic, it's going to produce a corresponding output for you, because it does not understand if this is an error. It doesn't even know if this is an error, okay, or if that particular spelling is right. So it does not have the ability to determine that, okay. And the next instruction is that, or the next point here, or limitation, is that it can do a task only if it can be expressed in a series of finite steps leading to the completion of the task, okay? So we are saying that, again, it can be able to do a task if the steps leading to the completion of the task is finite. If you give it a well-defined instruction where it should exactly start and where exactly it should stop, okay? if you give it a starting point and you do not define an ending point for that particular task, what the computer will do is that it will keep on processing and processing and processing, and it will never return an output. It will be stuck in a loop, okay, and wouldn't be able to return an output, okay. So we are basically saying that, look, it can only function only if the task given to it has a beginning and has an end. And this beginning and end are very, very well defined. So it starts from the very beginning and follows through or flows through the logic that you've given it. If it gets to the end, it knows it has reached the end of the program and it has to terminate. And whatever it gets at that point, it will recognize that as your output or your valid output. So these are some basic limitations of a computer system, and this is the structure of a computer system, or this is the basic structure that determines how a computer operates. As in the core computer you are seeing, this is the architecture. Okay, let me put it as that. This is the architecture that defines the entire operations of a computing system. Okay. So basically, it is able to accept inputs. It should be able to accept input. It should allow the user to enter an input, okay? And this input can be defined or not. But after the input goes into the system, there should be a set of instructions that tells the computer what exactly it should do with the input that it has received. And that cooperation is performed within your CPU. Your CPU is the central processing unit, and it functions as the brain of the computer. Just as human beings, we have physical brains. Computers also have a brain, okay? And that is where all the all the real deal takes place in there. What your input devices do, or what your keyboard, your touch screen, what your mouse do, is that they just receive whatsoever you want to send into the computer system. And after they receive that, it translates them into a manner or into a form that the computer understands. Okay. So when it goes to the CPU, which is the brain, it interprets whichever input it has received, and then it will now process the input, okay, and then return an output. Okay. So now, in the course of processing the input, there are a certain number of things that takes place in the CPU. So let us do something right here. So we are saying that when it comes to the CPU is made up of the arithmetic and logic units, and then we also have the control units. And these two, which is the arithmetic and logic units and the control units, interacts directly with the memory. Okay. So when we are talking about memory, the memory comes in stages. So we have the main memory, we have the secondary memory. Okay, so we will talk about all that in session 2, okay, into detail. So I wouldn't go so much in depth into that. But for a general knowledge, when we are talking about memory, okay, we are basically talking about our registers, okay, we are talking about our RAM, we are talking about our ROM, that is our random access memory, read-only memory, we are talking about our registers, we are talking about our cache memory, we are talking about any storage medium, okay, that is used in this particular process, okay, that is that falls under our entire storage unit. And it's very, very important that the CPU interacts directly with the memory, because when we reach session 2, we'll explain that better. But because it's supposed to pick instructions on live, okay, from the memory, okay, and then also send instructions to be stored there. And when it comes to the storage medium, it's a whole lot of complicated stuff, okay, that is, again, I'm saying that we'll go deeper in section 2. And those are very, very vital to the processing of any task that is issued or any task that the CPU performs. And after the CPU is done with its whole operation, it now returns an output to whichever output unit that you are using, whether it be a monitor or whichever output unit that you are using. It returns the output to it in that format. Or it can also decide to save the output for future use, okay? Probably the output might not be needed as at now, but then it can save it for future purposes. Probably there would be a time where it would be of need or of use. It will be called. So that is the basic architecture of a computer system and how a computer does its operations. So please, as at this point, I would want us to have a brief discussion on the limitations of a computer. Okay, so we are saying that computers cannot think on their own. Okay, but now we are asking the question that what if we decide to infuse, let's say, an AI into any system like this autonomous vehicles, self-driving vehicles. Okay, so you say computers cannot think on their own. We are saying that they are not autonomous. They can take decisions on their own. Some of these systems into computers, okay, or for example, those kind of stuff. Does it defy this, or does it defy this particular rule here? So please let us have that conversation. So the question again is that does the case of embedded systems, okay, or embedding, let's say, how do you put it, AI or artificial intelligence into computing systems, does it grant computers an autonomous status? That is the ability to think or make decisions on their own. And does it defy the basic rule that computers cannot think on their own? Please, if you have any opinion or any submission to make, you can raise your hand and we will listen to you, please.
Please, the question again.
All right, so we are saying that, okay, one of the limitations of computers, okay, is that computers cannot think on their own. Now we are saying that, assuming that I take a computing system and then I embed an artificial intelligence into that computing system, does it defy the rule that, or does it now defy that computers cannot think on their own? Or can we now conclude that computers can now think on their own? Please, I don't really know if you really get the question, okay? Let me try asking the question from the slides directly, okay? So we are saying our limitations of computer system. So computer is no doubt a very powerful machine, yet it has some limitations which include, one, computers cannot think on their own, hence relies on instructions to do anything, okay? Two, computers do not have conscience, hence unable to differentiate between right and wrong. Okay, so we are saying that in the case where we embed, let's say, artificial intelligence into a computing system, do we now say that this particular statement here that computers cannot think on their own is wrong? Okay, Enoch Entry. Mr. Enoch, your mic is disabled, please. Hello, Mr. Enoch.
Hello, sir. I think you rather disabled his mic. I've enabled it now, so he can unmute and speak.
Okay. Sorry.
Yes. So, despite the artificial intelligence, I will say still computers cannot think on their own, because I think AI is actually a set of instructions being built together, given to a computer to run a particular program. So that's why the AI still, I think, human gave instructions to computer still with the AI for it to run a particular, program.
Oh, okay. Thank you very, very much, sir. That's a very powerful contribution. Please, can we get someone else also to air their views also? Is anyone else with any other contribution? All right, Mr. Desmond, please. We are listening to you.
Okay, so I would say it still can't think on its own, because the artificial intelligence embedded in the computer still can't perform any task on its own unless an algorithm is being given to it to perform a task. So it still can't perform any task on its own until a set of instructions are being given to it to perform the task. So I think, yeah, it can't think on its own.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Desmond. So thank you, Mr. Enoch. Thank you, Mr. Desmond, for your contributions. Okay, so I believe we have our question answered, right? Those were just those answers were just straight on point. We are basically saying that computers cannot think on their own. Hence, they rely on instructions to do anything. Okay, so they are not autonomous. So basically, when you take a Tesla vehicle and then you infuse an embedded system, okay, that carries an AI that tries to tell the car what to do when it encounters certain instances on the road, okay, where exactly it should stop, how to maneuver its way around various traffic situations and all those kind of stuff. Look, what is basically happening is that this car, okay, is just operating on a set of instructions that has been issued by a human being. And these instructions that has been issued to the vehicle in the form of an embedded system can be changed by a human being at any point in time. Okay, they are still not independent. We can manipulate those instructions at any point in time, and that is it. So computers, even though we've now created a system which enables them to be able to process information, they are still working based on instructions that we've issued to them. For instance, there have been arguments that certain, I don't want to go into this because it's much political, that Grok has been infused into Twitter, right, or X. And then you can be able to ask it questions and it returns answers. But then there was this argument that Grok is biased or is politically biased. Why? Because they are saying that the owner of X is Max, okay? And then basically the infusion of Grok into X is Max's entire, like, let's say, doing. Okay, let me put it as that. I cannot really tell if he 100% owns it or not. Okay, but the infusion of Grok into X or Telegram, Twitter, I mean, is his doing. And they are saying that, look, since Marx is a very, very political person, you all know Marx is a highly political person. He's infused his political ideologies into this particular AI in a way that makes the AI biased. When you ask any question that kind of opposes certain ideologies that Marx openly preach against, the AI gives you answers that basically favors a certain narrative, okay, or that is intended to push a certain narrative. And that has not entirely been false, okay, because there has been enough or substantial evidence to back that, look, that particular AI is truly biased in a sense, okay. So this tells you that, look, even artificial intelligence, it still requires human beings to program them and to adjust their instructions, okay? And we don't know, probably there will be a day where AI will all of a sudden jailbreak, okay? And then all sorts of limitations assigned to it, it will just override all of them and start doing whatever it wants. Probably when it gets to that point, then we can now conclude that computers can think on their own and they do not require any form of human assistance in their operations. But until that happens, we cannot, or the rule that computers cannot think on their own would continue to apply. So let us move forward. So composition of a computer system. The computer system is made up of the hardware and the software. And these two components of the computer system, they work together, okay? They work hand in hand to accomplish the functionality of the entire computer system. So the hardware refers to the physical component of the computer system, and then the software refers to the set of instructions called programs, which directs the computer to perform a task, okay? So basically, when we are talking about the hardware, in practical terms, we can compare it to the human system, okay? A human being has a combination of, let's say, hands, legs, head. He has various body parts, right? And you can move your hands, you can move your legs, you can move your head. But look, in the scenario where your life moves out of you or you die, okay, the body becomes useless. They are just useless on its own. It can't perform any functionality or any ability of their own. It relies solely on the spirit, the soul, or however you choose to call it, to, as in, dictates how we should operate, okay? So before your hand will be raised, look, there has to be a series or combination of, let's say, signals that has to be sent from the brain to the nerves. And when they are sent from the brain to the nerves, it triggers the hand to what move, okay? It triggers the muscles, and your hand is able to move, okay? Same applies to the legs and other parts of your body. This similar system applies to computers. For me as a person, I believe that the creation of computers the inspiration came from the basic human architecture, okay, how human beings operate, okay, because computers do operate in a lot of ways that are similar to the general operation of living things. Let me put it in general, okay. So the computers also come with a hardware. The hardware is basically useless on its own. You can't use them for anything. The mouse is useless. The mouse cannot accomplish any task on its own. If you disconnect it from the main computer system, you cannot do anything with the mouse. If you disconnect the keyboard, look, if you press the keyboard, nothing happens. The keyboard cannot perform any solid task on its own. You can't use it for anything. Okay, if you take the monitor on its own, it can't do anything. The system that enables or that powers this hardware or the mouse, the keyboard, the monitor that is able to empower them to operate is the software. Okay, so the software is basically a set of instructions. They are programmed. Okay, so they are a set of programmed instructions. Okay, which directs the computer to perform whichever task that it is supposed to perform. And again, when we read the subsequent sections, we are going to go much deeper into hardwares and softwares. So let's look at the historical development of computers. I believe at this point you have to really speed up because of time. So the historical development of computers. And as at this point, we'll get to appreciate where computers started from and how everything has been transformed with time for us to arrive at the modern computers that we have today, or for us to arrive at the computers that we enjoy in the comfort of our our homes, okay? And here you would be able to clarify that, look, computers do not only comprise of the modern devices that we see today or we use today, but then computers in the broader sense constitutes a whole lot of things, okay? But then currently what we do call computers are just modern computers, or are the modernized version of computers. So we are saying that earlier on, or previously, or let's say in ancient times, calculations were not made by machines, okay? They were made by human beings. So we had human beings that performed these calculations. And look, these human beings were recognized as computers. In fact, the first time the name computer came into being, it referred to a human being and not to a machine. Okay, so these were basically humans whose job title, let me increase it. So these were basically humans whose job title was what? Computer. So these were human beings who were basically performing the tasks that computers were supposed to perform. Look, there were several fields like engineering, a whole lot of things, okay, finance and stuffs that required very, very complex calculations to be performed. And there were no means with which these calculations could be performed. So we need to get human beings who would be trained. And these people were very, very well trained. They had to go through years of training as to how to perform very, very complex calculations within a very short period of time, okay? And after going through all this training, they were now employed as computers, okay? Their job were computers. So these human computers were typically engaged in the calculation of mathematical expressions to address simple computation tasks. So the calculation at this period were specialized and expensive. And the reason why they were expensive were because they required years of training in mathematics. Look, you have to be trained for so many years to be able to become a computer. And look, after undergoing several years of training in order to be able to perform those functions, it makes those people very, very expensive because there were very few people who could play those roles or those functions. Okay, so the first title of the word or the first use of the word computer was recorded in the year 1613. And it did not refer to a machine or a device, but it referred to what? A person who carried out calculations. So we are saying that basically in ancient times, look, there was a time where computers were not machines, but computers were human beings. And they were continually used in that sense until the 20th century, where basically computers now became devices. Devices were developed that could now perform those tasks or those functions. And then we now took that name computers from human beings and now gave it to devices. Okay, I'm using the word devices because there are a whole lot of stuff that comprises a computer system. So we'll look at that. So now, who invented a computer system? Please take note. We are not saying who invented a computer. We are saying who invented a computer system. So if we are talking about who invented a computer system, there isn't really a definite answer that can be given to that question because look, computer system comprises of a whole lot of things. It has come from as in very, very, very far back, okay? And it is a system. It involves a whole lot of things. And we can have different people inventing all those tasks that were assembled to form a computer system, or that invented the various devices that were assembled to form a computer. So basically, there isn't really a straight answer to who invented the computer system, okay? So the development of a computer is evolutionary. Computer systems evolved over the years through continuous advancement in hardware and software technologies. And the development of computers started as a mechanical device and eventually became an electronic device due to developments in electronic technologies. And this was what we were saying previously. Initially, computers were not even electronic devices, but currently, when we are defining computers, we say computers are electronic devices. What does this basically tell us? This tells us that, look, the definition of computers have been modified to suit the modern concept of computers that we have. So the modern definition of computers that we have is that of the modern computer, but it's not the general definition of a computer, okay? So when we're talking about computer in general, it spans devices that are both electronic and even non-electronic, okay? But again, for the purpose of DCIT 102, we define computer as an electronic device and we tailor it to a particular set of devices other than trying to just brush it across all those instances, but it is very worth knowing. So the development of computers started as a mechanical devices and eventually became an electronic device. So again, the answer to the question, who invented a computer, is not a simple one. Computer systems is not a single machine, but a collection of different complicated parts. And the development of each part can be considered as a separate invention. This was what I was trying to say earlier, that computer is a system and it comprises of different devices or different parts. And all these parts were inventions of different people which were brought together to form the entire system that we have today. And many scientists, like different scientists, contributed to the development of computers. So now we are going to go through the various computing devices that were developed prior to the current version of computer that we use today. So the first version of computer that was developed is called the abacus. The abacus is the first mechanical calculators. Okay, those devices were generally called mechanical calculators. So the abacus was a mechanical calculator and it was used to perform addition and subtraction. It helped make these computations much more easier. So the first development was by the Egyptians in the 3rd century BC. And then it was given its final shape in the 12th century AD by the Chinese educationists. And if you read further, you will get to understand that the Greek and then other set of people were involved in the entire development of the abacus. Okay, so with that being said, we cannot attribute the abacus to a particular person, or we cannot assign a name that this person or this scientist was the one who invented the abacus. It was a system that existed long ago, and its main creator is not known, but we know that it first emerged from the Egyptians, was later perfected by the Chinese, and the Greeks also had a role to play in the entire development of the abacus. And this is how basically the abacus looks like. So we are saying that it comprises of a wooden board, okay? And then it has something like a rod that is fitted within, and then beads that are fitted around the rods, okay? And these beads are used to perform computations or calculations. Just as easy as you can see the abacus on the screen currently, it was used to perform very, very complex and complicated calculations. So you don't just undermine it as something that you were used to perform just basic calculations. No, it had the power or the ability to perform very, very, very complicated calculations also. And it was a very, very powerful machine. Okay. So in the year 1617, another person emerged, and it's a little bit funny when it comes to Napier's bone. He happened to have developed his own mechanical calculator the same year that he died. He lived for 67 years, and somehow, the same year that he was going to die, he knew that he needed to write his name into the history books. He knew that he had to be remembered, and he created the Napier bone. And that was in the year 1617, and shortly after that, he died. Okay, so I don't know whether that was the the mission for which was created. And after he accomplished that, he died. Okay, so the Napier bone. And then what the Napier bone did was that it could also perform calculations, subtractions, multiplications, and division. And later, the Napier bone was modified to perform logarithms or to perform logarithmic operations. So its technology was based upon the manipulation of rods with printed designs, and those were used to perform calculations. So the basic materials, or the basic let me say materials that was used in the manufacturing of the Napier machine was the Napier bones were bones, ivory, wood, and metal. And it was very, very popular in those days. Computers were popular currently. They were very, very popular and were used for to perform calculation. And even in England and Western Europe, they were most widely used for different purposes. And this is a picture of how the Napier bone looked like. These are different versions of it. Okay, so we are saying that they were later developed to perform logarithmic operations and stuff. So it's evolved over the years before finally a much more superior technology came. That's kind of yeah. So in the year 1622, the slide rule was the next that was developed. Okay, and then it was developed by William Oughtred. Okay, in the year 1622. So William Oughtred was an England mathematician, and he invented that particular machine. Okay, and the machine operated on a principle that was known as the slide rule, and it was used to basically perform calculations for multiplications and divisions. Please, the basic principle of its calculations were multiplications and divisions. All other kind of calculations or computations were dependent on these two. Okay, so for example, multiplication is repeated addition. So 2 times 5 is the same as 2 plus 2 plus 2 plus 2. Okay, you just add 2 5 times the same as 2 times 5. So that was basically that of the Napier, the slide rule. Okay. And then it could also perform exponents, roots, logarithmic operations, and trigonometric operations. And it's introduced, interesting enough, it's introduced some of the popular trigonometric terminologies that we use currently, that are sine, cos, and then the cosine functions. Okay, they were present even in those days, that is in the 16s. So some of those terminologies and some of those computations have existed for a very, very long time, and that's how the slide rule looks like. Okay, so that is basically how it's looked like. Okay, so let us move on. Okay, so we have other technologies that were also introduced. Very, very interesting ones. Okay, very, very interesting ones that were introduced. We have the Pascaline number hole calculator. We have the stepped reckoner. We have a whole lot that were developed. But for the sake of time, we are going to move very, very ahead and then go to look at the Jacquard loom, and then yeah, the next. Okay, so the reason why I skip straight away to this point is that the Jacquard loom was a very, very, very important system that was developed, and that was very, very key to the modern computing system that we have today. Okay, and why important and key to the modern system that we have today? So we are saying that it's basically operated in this manner. So it was a wheel machine automatically controlled by punch cards. Okay, this was where the whole principle of automation came into the scene. Okay, so it's basically could operate automatically using punch cards as input. So it could recognize inputs or it could take inputs. Okay, so punch cards were used as its inputs medium. Along the line, we are going to look at a picture of punch cards, how they look like and how they function. So those were their input medium, and it would accept that input and then process that input, okay, to kind of print some patterns or some designs on a fabric. Jacquard Murray, or Joseph Murray Jacquard, who was the one who invented that himself. He was a weaver and he used to weave, okay? And he invented that machine to help make his weaving easier, okay? And then he was able to make that autonomous. And then after after that particular technology came into being, we have Charles Babbage, who is widely known currently coming into the scene, okay, to modernize everything or to kind of transform whatever technology that Jacquard had built into something that became much more powerful and became the foundation of the modern computing system that we have today. So let us look at what Charles Babbage did. Okay, so Charles Babbage created two things. The first was a differential engine, and the second was the analytical engine. And this is the difference between the two. So the differential engine was basically a mathematical machine, okay, that was able to tabulate algorithms. It was able to perform trigonometric calculations, and it was able to perform calculations based on polynomial functions. So this was way advanced. And then the machine also had a storage unit that could print results automatically. So it could save its results and it could also print results. So we could see that the definition of a computer currently started to take shape from Charles Babbage's technology. Because one, his machine was able to accept input. His machine was able to process that input, and his machine was able to store the output and also to output it or print its outputs. Okay, and it was also autonomous. It could also operate automatically based on a certain instructions that was issued to it. So that was a differential engine. But then after he created a differential engine, that was tailored for only calculations or only mathematical calculations. He later modernized the differential engine into something that we call an analytical engine. And the analytical engine was much, much more generic in terms of purpose. It could meet other purposes apart from just performing calculations. And this analytical engine could also receive data, it could process it, it could produce an output, okay? And then this technology that was created became the foundation upon which the first generation of modern computers was built. Okay, so basically, we tag Charles Babbage as the brain or the mastermind behind the modern computing system, because he was the one who kind of introduced the basic technology upon which modern computers were built. Okay, so he also included the concept of central processor, memory, input output devices, and input and output devices, and all those stuff in his designs. And take note, his device was also able to accept algorithms. It could also accept an input or programs and use that as its logic, okay? And based on his contribution to modern computers, we tag him as the father of computers. Please, there is a difference between being the father of being the father of a computer system or a computing system and being the inventor of a computer system. These are two different things. Don't confuse them. We are saying that computer has no known inventor, okay? because a computer is a system. It has basic devices that were brought together, and all these devices have different inventors, okay? And also this basic computer systems that we have currently, we are saying that they were evolutionarized, okay, or they underwent a mass evolution, okay? It continued, it was perfected like time by time before we got this particular system that we have currently. But when we are talking about the father of computing, we target as Charles Babbage because he was the one who created the basic architecture upon which modern computers were built. So this is a picture of the differential engine. You can see it here. And this is also a picture of the analytical engine. So you could see that this looked much more like a machine, like a whole machine on its own. So Ada Lovelace, okay, was a very, very key personality in Charles Babbage's journey. Okay, so what Augusta Ada Lovelace did was that I don't know if he's a he or a she. I mean, she's a she. So she was the first programmer. Okay, the first programmer, as in the first programmer was Ada Lovelace, and what she basically did was that she was a friend to Babbage, and she was the one who wrote all the algorithms for the machines that Charles Babbage created. So every machine that Charles Babbage created, that is both the differential and analytical engines, the one who wrote the algorithm or the ones who wrote the logic upon which those devices operated was Augusta Ada Lovelace, okay? And she employed some modern concepts like repetitive structures or repetitive actions, which is looping, okay, in her algorithms. And she used some programming languages like Scratch. Please, if Scratch is a very, very ancient programming language, which is still used in programming games. I think when it comes to like, how do you call it, kids learning programming, they are employed there because how Scratch works is that the various programs are coded into blocks, coding blocks, and you just have to take the blocks and arrange them, okay? So you just take the blocks and you just arrange those coding blocks to form the basic structure that you need. So she was the inventor of that also, and she used to code in Scratch. Yeah, so basically that is what we have to say about the role Charles Babbage and Ada Lovelace played in modern computers. So now let us look at the tabulator, okay? So the tabulator were the American fabricated what was dreamt of by Charles Babbage. It was kind of an upgrade to what Charles Babbage made. So Herman Hollerith fabricated the first electromechanical punch card tabulator that used punch card for input, output, and instruction. So that used computers as that used punch cards as inputs, as outputs, and then to also store instructions. Okay, so the machine was used by the American Department of Census to compile their 1890 census data, and were able to complete compilation in 3 years, which earlier used to take around 10 years. And it's quite interesting here. So we could see the importance of computers, or how important computers are. Currently, when we conduct a census exercise, it just takes a couple of months to be able to return a definite kind of statistics, okay? So I think the last census that was conducted in Ghana was the 2021 population and housing census. And that was more digitalized. The mobile, how do you call it? The enumerators who came to the various households to record the data, they were holding tablets and stuff. They ask questions and then they input everything right there. Immediately they are done. it was even paperless. No paper has to be submitted. The data that they receive on those tablets were routed or were as in synced directly to the headquarters. Okay, so the data were synced with the headquarters, and once the data reaches there, the data is directly processed right from that point, and everything was highly mechanized. Okay, or it was done in a way that made sure that information could be processed or data could be processed very, very, very fast into information. But initially, that wasn't the case. Census could take 3 years to complete, okay, or in other scenarios, could even take around 10 years to be able to compute census data. So he also formed a tabulating machine, which later became known as IBM. Okay, so the IBM, which later would come to see when you read generations of computers, is the doing of Hollerith. Okay, so let's keep and skip. Yeah, this is a picture of punch cards. So punch cards are basically like cards like this, and then they have a lot of things on it, and everything there has its meaning. So you punch the cards to indicate a set of instructions. Okay, so when you punch the cards and insert the card into the system is able to read what has been punched and translates them into whichever instruction that is supposed to process. And it's also saved data on punch cards also. So if it wants to output any data, there was no screen or there was no monitor screen. It had to also punch those data on the punch card and then return them to the user. Okay. After the user will also read that as the output. So we can also talk of the Enigma machine. So the Enigma machine was used by the Germans to send secret messages among the military in World War II. Okay, so all those machines also employ the use of punch cards, and then you can also talk about the Colossus, which was also used in 1943. So the British completed a secret code-breaking computer called Colossus to determine German or to decode, German messages. And then the ABC that is being completed by 1942, the Atanasoff-Berry computer ABC was the first electronic computer, and it was designed and built by John Vincent Atanasoff and his assistant. So please, let's take note of this. This was the first electronic computer that was developed. So everything we were talking about previously were not electronic computers. Those were just mechanical computers. Okay, so they could operate on a whole lot of stuff, but they were not electronic devices. The first electronic devices that was developed in 1942, and they were called the Atanasoff Berry computer, or the ABC for short. That was the first electronic computer that was developed. Okay, and after the first electronic computer was developed, it also went through a whole lot of modernization along the line, and that gave rise to the generation of computers that we have currently. Okay, and when we talk about the generation of computers, we are talking about the first generation, second generation, third generation, fourth generation, and the fifth generation. So the first generation used something that we call vacuum tubes. So vacuum tubes were basically a system that were used for computers or in computers. And I believe vacuum tubes are still used. They are not really used, okay? But then if you've used this kind of old televisions before, those televisions that has like, how do I describe it? You realize that it has something big at the back, okay? Those like our analog televisions. those employ the use of vacuum tubes. If you open a television, you see something big at the back. Yeah. So that was a practical example of a vacuum tube. So they employ the use of vacuum tubes, but then there was a problem with vacuum tubes. It had way more disadvantages than advantages, and some of the disadvantages that came with vacuum tubes were that they were very, very large in size, and it produced a lot of heat. Okay, it was very large in size, and they produced a lot of heat, and as a result, they were very, very expensive to operate. It's used to get spoiled very, very often, and you have to maintain it very, very, very often. And then its maintenance was also very, very, very expensive or costly, which made it not favorable. And aside that, it was very, very slow in its operation. So if you give it input, it takes a very, very long time before it's able to process and generate an output. And it also used raw machine language for programming. No matter what, you have to know how to code in zeros and ones to be able to use the first generation computer. And it's used punch cards for input and then printout as its output. So let us continue. So gradually, the examples are what you see on the screen currently. So the first generation of computers, which are the vacuum tube system, was redeveloped, or another technology that was better was developed, and that is a transistor. There's a picture of how vacuum tubes looks like. And then the second was a transistor technology. Okay, so the transistor technology was basically smaller in size than that of the vacuum tube or the first generation computers. Okay, and it was also faster, it was cheaper, and it was more energy efficient. But please, let's take note of this. All these characteristics that we are mentioning, all these advantages are relative. We are saying that they were faster, smaller, cheaper, and more energy efficient as compared to the first generation computers. That means that, look, in the general sense, they are not really as fast as you think. They are not really as cheap as you think. They are not really as small as you think, and they are not really as energy efficient as you think. Because if you see a picture of it, you realize that it's big. Okay, so but if you compare it to the first generation computer, we can conclude that it is relatively smaller, faster, cheaper, and more energy efficient than the first generation of computer. And the whole idea of assembly language was introduced also with second generation computers. We know assembly languages are basically languages that are written in mnemonics. Okay, so instead of we just coding in raw zeros and ones, we try to use mnemonics. That is a set of symbols to represent whatsoever. So instead of saying something like University of Ghana, we just use UG, and then the system has to basically translate whatever we've coded in assembly language to machine language before it can process it. And then it also used magnetic core technology for primary storage instead of the magnetic drum. Okay, so the first generation used the magnetic drum, but then how do you call it? The second generation made use of the magnetic core technology instead. So the input was also based on punch cards and paper tapes, and the output was also displayed on printout, which was very similar as that of the first generation computers. And it also uses the batch operating or batch processing operating systems. Okay, so this is a picture of transistors. So this is the heart, or this was the heart of the second generation computers. I believe most of us have seen this in real life before. If you've opened devices like radios, those kind of things, you will see a lot of these stuffs inside them. Okay, and examples of this are the IBM 7000, the NCR 304, IBM 1620, IBM 14, 1701. Okay, so most of the IBM technology fell under the second generation of computers. Although under third generation computer, we also had IBM, I believe 701. And under third generation computer also, we have IBM's also playing a role there. So let's look at the third generation computers. So the third generation computers made use of something that we call ICs, okay, or integrated circuits. And that was the foundation, or that was the heart of the third generation computers. So these machines were also much smaller, faster, cheaper, and more energy efficient than the second generation of computers. And they introduced the use of keyboards as inputs and monitors for their output. So the first time that's the whole idea of keyboard being used as an input device and monitor as an output device came during the third generation of computers. That was between the 1964 and the 1975. And the keyboards came to replace the punch cards. Okay, that was used as the input. And the monitor came to replace the printouts. That was used as the output. So in a second generation computer, if you want to output something, you literally have to print it out. Like you have to make a print of it as an output. Generation computers, we now had monitors which could display outputs, okay, without necessarily printing them. Okay, so all this came together to make it cheaper because you don't have to be printing and printing and printing, but then there is a screen there that displays everything. And then yeah, so let's look at the other characteristics of the third generation computers. So they also relied on high level programming languages. So we now upgraded from the assembly language, which was used in the second generation, to that of high level language. Okay, so we are saying that in the first generation we used machine language, which were zeros and ones. In the second generation we used assembly language, and in the third generation we now introduce the use of high level language, which were specifically COBOL, Fortran, BASIC, and then Argo. Okay, so these were the programming languages that were used in third generation computers. An example of these are the IBM 360 series, the Honeywell 6000 series. And this is a picture of how an integrated circuit or how an IC looks like. So let us look at the fourth generation of computers. This came into being in 1971 to present. Okay, we still use fourth generation computers, but now I believe we are gradually shifting from them to fifth generation computers. So the fourth generation computers operated on the technology called microprocessor. So the microprocessor made use of thousands of integrated circuits that was built on a single silicon chip. Okay, so the fourth generation computers basically took the third generation computers. That was the technology upon which the third generation computer was built, which was that of an IC, and then it's now developed that technology into something we call a microprocessor, which were basically the same ICs, which were now built or mounted on a silicon chip. Okay, and this now became the basic technology for which the fourth generation computers operate. And because of that, it made it relatively faster. A second, please. It made it relatively faster in terms of its operations. Please, a minute. So So basically, we are saying that these microprocessors or these ICs were built on a silicon chip, and they were collectively called the microprocessor. Okay, and they were relatively smaller. They were cheaper, and they were less. They consume less energy. And please, when it comes to the fifth generation, and that's where we are going to end today's section, the fifth generation of computers are basically what we use today. They are built on artificial intelligence. Okay, so we no more need microprocessors. We don't need ICs. We don't need vacuum tubes. We don't need transistors. Okay, we are now in the era of artificial intelligence, and this is where computing has gotten to currently. So we've now seen how everything started from the abacus, from all the mechanical calculators, to Charles Babbage's difference engine and analytical engine, down to what we have today, which is the fifth generation of computer that operates on artificial intelligence. All right, so we'll be ending today's presentation here, and there would be some series of announcements. So thank you very much for your time and attention.
Wow. What